I'm delighted firstly to welcome our speaker, Stephen Dunmore, the Chief Executive of the Fundraising Regulator. Stephen has a long history with various charities and third sector bodies. He was previously Chief Executive of the New Opportunities Fund and Big Lottery Fund. Since then, he has been Interim Chief Executive of the Responsible Gambling Fund and also been involved with the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund, the Lumos Foundation, National Consumer Council, Family and Childcare Trust. He was a chair of Capacity Builders, National Family Mediation, and the BBC's Awards Advisory Committee. Stephen is going to talk about fundraising, and in particular, the role of the Fundraising Regulator. Stephen.
Good morning. Everybody hear me? Yeah. Good. Thank you, Nick, for that introduction. The title of my presentation, I gather, is Respectable Fundraising, which sounds incredibly boring, actually. I'd prefer it to be excellent fundraising, so perhaps we can stick with that. Nick has pinched a lot of my speech already, actually. Thanks for that, Nick. But he did refer to the media coverage, and he mentioned the word unfair, and probably some of the media coverage over the last 18 months in relation to fundraising has been unfair, but it's there, and I think we all have to recognise that fact, and we do have to recognise the fact, again, as Nick said, that although by no means all charities have been doing anything wrong in terms of fundraising, the negative media coverage affects all, and it certainly has contributed, along with one or two other things which Nick referred to, it's contributed to a diminution of confidence in the charitable sector. And I think in the 6 months it's now 9 months I've been in post, and the first 6 months were basically taken up with setting up a new organisation. There has been a bit of a sea change in attitudes. When I arrived in January, there was a lot of complaining and people saying this isn't fair, people saying it wasn't us, it was them, and people saying is there really a problem? And I think a lot of that has gone away, and there's now a much wider recognition across the whole charitable sector that there is a problem, and that even if individual charities are not responsible for that problem, they need to be part of the solution. And I would say that I think there's a couple of umbrella bodies out there with whom you'll be familiar who still haven't come round to the idea that there's a problem and that regulation might contribute to solving that problem. And that's Akivo and the Directory of Social Change. But apart from them, I think there is a widespread recognition in the sector that we do need to work together to put things right. And one other point by way of introduction, in my view, regulation is not about punishment. It's not even primarily about rules. I think it's about cultural change, and particularly since we're a voluntary regulator, it's about cultural change that the sector can achieve for itself working alongside us. Just to dwell a little bit on history, in case anybody here is not familiar with it, and Nick mentioned some of it, there have been a number of high-profile cases of fundraising malpractice, and Olive Cook was one of those, exposed in the media. And following that, the cross-party review, the Etherington Review of Fundraising Regulation, was published in September 2015. And Chapter 5 of the review set out the criteria for and recommendations about what a new regulatory regime might look like and what it should seek to achieve, and a bit about how it should be structured. And the recommendations of the Etherington Review were accepted by the government, and you're going to be hearing from Rob Wilson later today. the Institute of Fundraising, Public Fundraising Association and the Charity Commission. This was followed by the report of the Parliamentary Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee in January, and that emphasised the role of trustees in protecting the values and reputations of charities, as well as the need for them to cooperate with the regulator and the Charity Commission in making strengthened arrangements for fundraising work effectively to protect the interests of the public. Following that, and Nick referred to this, there was new guidance on fundraising from the Charity Commission, CC20. I think that was in July, and the guidance emphasised that trustees have ultimate responsibility for fundraising and must provide effective oversight, focusing on donor care and ensuring that their charity complies with the law and follows best practice. I think the emphasis on trustees' responsibilities is fine, but corporate governance is not just about trustees, it's about senior executives as well. And it's for senior executives to give trustees the right advice and information to enable them to challenge and make the right decisions. So I think it is a shared responsibility. And in my view, the Parliamentary and Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee report, sorry that's a mouthful, went a bit over the top in laying everything at the door of trustees. And then, as Nick said again, we got the new Charities Act, which came into force on the 1st of November, so it now applies, and that includes requirements regarding the content of contracts. It says one or two things about what you need to put in contracts with fundraising agencies, if you're using a fundraising agency. And it also says things about the inclusion of fundraising information in annual reports. And of course, as you'll know, the Charities Act also includes reserve powers, which ministers could implement were the voluntary approach to regulation not to work. So they could then convert it to a statutory approach. What was proposed in the Etherington Review was the creation of a new regulator and a new approach to fundraising regulation based on 3 lines of defence: trustees in the first instance, a new independent fundraising regulator, that's us, funded via a levy on the sector, and as the 3rd line of defence, the relevant charity regulators across the UK, the Charity Commission for Northern Ireland and the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator. And the review concluded that the Fundraising Standards Board, which was the existing fundraising regulator, was under-resourced and lacked independence, both because it had a membership structure and, more importantly, because it relied on the Institute of Fundraising to secure changes to the Code of Fundraising Practice, which was owned by the Institute. And so the result of that was to propose the setting up of a new fundraising regulator responsible for the independent voluntary regulation of all types of fundraising, not just those that had caused difficulties in the media and with donors, all types of fundraising by UK-based charities, and for handling complaints about fundraising in the UK. And it would be funded by a levy on the industry, as I said. It would take over the regulatory role of the Fundraising Standards Board. It would take over the Code of Fundraising Practice from the Institute of Fundraising and the rule books on door-to-door and street collection from the Public Fundraising Association. And in the new system, the Charity Commission and other statutory regulators, and I guess we need to include the Information Commissioner in that, would act as a backstop in cases where there were regulatory concerns that fell within their remit and powers. For example, where there was a breach of trustee duties in the case of the Charity Commission, or where there was a breach of data protection legislation in the case of the Information Commissioner. We are a company limited by guarantee without share capital. We've got a non-executive board of directors from inside and outside the fundraising sector, an awful lot of experience on the board and our committees from the charitable and fundraising sectors, which is essential. We've got members with extensive experience of regulation, codes of practice and the like. And obviously the directors are responsible for the overall control and strategic direction of the fundraising regulator. And our purpose is to ensure that fundraising is respectful, open, honest and accountable to the public. And we'll regulate, as I said, all forms of fundraising and all charities, whether they're registered or exempt, and whether they're registered with the Charity Commission or they're exempt, and whether they're registered with us or not. And we aim to set and promote standards of fundraising through the Code of Fundraising Practice. And we'll do that very much in consultation with the public, with fundraising stakeholders and legislators. We aim to investigate cases where fundraising practices have led to significant public concern. We will adjudicate complaints from the public where they can't be resolved by the charities themselves. We'll introduce and operate a fundraising preference service, which is probably one of the most controversial parts of the Etherington Review's proposals, a fundraising preference service to enable individuals to manage their own contacts with charities. And where poor fundraising practices are judged to have taken place, we'll recommend best practice guidance and on occasion we'll take remedial action. And the idea is that we protect the public donors and potential donors, not least those who are vulnerable, like Olive Cook, from unacceptable fundraising practices. And by so doing, we'll sustain and enhance public confidence in the sector. We will act independently, transparently, fairly and proportionately, and I think if you look at our website you'll see that we're doing our very best to be transparent about all that we're doing at the moment. Please do consult the website. But I would say that a regulator, statutory or otherwise, can't operate effectively without the confidence of the sector that it regulates. So it's really important that we work closely with the sector and we gain that confidence. But our first accountability is to donors and the public. I won't bore you with what we did over the first 6 months, but it was all the usual things. If any of you have set up an organisation or a charity, and I suspect many of you have, there's lots of hoops you have to go through. We've been through those hoops, but a lot of what we did in the first 6 months was to do with engaging with the sector, with umbrella bodies, with individual charities. We obviously couldn't talk to 165,000 charities, but we've talked to some of them, and particularly the larger ones. We've taken views, we've consulted through umbrella bodies, through events, seminars and presentations. So we've done our very best to bring the sector along with what's proposed. We've got 20 staff, which is 4 times as many as the Fundraising Standards Board had. And if the levy works out, as we hope it will, we'll have about 4 times the amount of income, an annual budget of something like 2.1 to 2.4 million. We've obviously developed a website. Again, please look at it. We've published proposals and consulted twice on a fundraising preference service arising from the proposals that were put together by the Fundraising Preference Service Working Group, which actually started work before I arrived. We've published proposals for the levy and our annual running costs, and we're now going out to get the levy in from those charities that are liable for it. And we've published proposals for a registration system for charities and fundraising agencies through which you can demonstrate your commitment to best practice, similar to the Fundraising Standards Board's logo and fundraising promise. And we've signed Memorandum of Understanding, and this is very important, with the Charity Commission, with the Information Commissioner, HEFCE, in relation, of course, to higher education institutions who are charities, though people tend to forget that, and also an MOU with the Institute of Fundraising. We've also, and this is an aside really, which I won't dwell on, we've tried to broker our geographical coverage across the UK. We will cover Wales because there is a single system of charity regulation across England and Wales. We will probably cover Northern Ireland, although they're discussing that at the moment. We will have in Scotland a co-regulatory system whereby there will be a Scottish process which regulates charities based in Scotland that are fundraising in Scotland, whereas we will regulate charities based in England that fundraise in Scotland. I hope that works smoothly. I suppose my concern is that however hard we try, and we will work in partnership, it may not always be clear to donors where they need to go. So there'll be a bit of movement back and forwards between the two systems, I think. So in early July, we took over responsibility for fundraising regulation, for complaints handling and adjudications. We inherited the Code of Fundraising Practice and the rule books, and we were set to go. So we've been actually doing the job now for July, August, September, October, 4 months. And in that time, we've handled over 300 complaints from the public, and we've had around about 400 inquiries as well, which we've dealt with. As I said, complaints will normally be referred back to the charity to put through their process, and then if it's not resolved, it can come back to us, and we'll keep tabs on that. But there are a number of complaints, a relatively limited number, that because of reasons of public interest, we will investigate ourselves. The complaints have ranged across a wide number of issues. Doorstep fundraising, addressed mail, cash collections, fundraising behaviour in general, often by agencies, misleading fundraising information, data protection breaches, and frequency of contact and approaches to vulnerable people. Surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, very little about telephone fundraising. And I think that since the media coverage last year, there has probably been a drop-off in telephone fundraising, even on behalf of the larger charities. So that may be a reason why we're not getting complaints about telephone fundraising, which I would have thought was probably one of the things that annoys people most. And we're also we're carrying out our first investigation, as you probably know, of a case revealed in The Sun of alleged fundraising malpractice in Bristol by a fundraising agency called Neatfeet and their 8 client charities. And we are about to produce, in the next couple of weeks, I hope, our decision on that adjudication. And I think it's fair to say that that adjudication, that investigation, teased out some of the problems that there have been in terms of the control that charities exert over the fundraising agencies with which they contract, the extent to which they monitor them effectively. And I don't think that's news or surprising. The Code of Fundraising Practice is central to our consideration of complaints and public interest cases. We have a standards committee which will be the keeper of the code, and we will be, because we have more resources, we'll be able to be more proactive than the FRSB was in terms of amending the code in consultation with the sector and the fundraising community. And we've already identified several priority areas which will need changes to reflect new circumstances and issues that are emerging. We plan to launch a major consultation in the new year on code development and changes. In addition to producing reports and recommendations for charities to amend their practices and amending the code, the regulator will also have an appropriate range of sanctions to use if necessary. I say sanctions, again, all of this is voluntary, but I think a fairly effective sanction is naming and shaming. So the reports we produce on adjudications, I hope, will really stimulate charities to change their practices. We may ask charities to cease and desist doing certain things. We may suggest requirements for training Or we may say that we would like to clear future fundraising campaigns, in particularly serious cases. And the expectation is that all charities who wish to demonstrate their compliance with the Code of Fundraising Practice and be badged accordingly will, from December or January, when we can get the IT into place, register with the Fundraising Regulator and sign up to the fundraising promise for payment of a nominal annual fee of £50. And please, again, I say look at the website, because there's a lot about that, the prospect of that on the website. Looking forward, my board on the 16th of November is going to look at the final proposals, a couple of options actually, for the fundraising preference service, taking into account feedback from the recent consultation. And our aim is to have the fundraising preference service up and running by the spring of 2017. You're probably aware that the original proposal in the Etherington review was for a rather dramatic big red button, which if you pushed, you would have no further contact from any charity ever again of any sort. The Working Party nuanced that a great deal because there was a great deal of concern out there about unintended consequences for charities. And so the proposal we consulted on a couple of months ago was the nuanced proposal with a lot of safeguards built in. But we'll see what my board makes of the feedback on that consultation and the options we put to them on the 16th of November. But soon after that, we will announce what the fundraising preference service is going to look like. But can I just come on to what I think is the most critical concern at the moment? And that's in an environment where I think the media coverage has not gone away. There will be more media coverage in November. And where the Information Commissioner is taking a very close interest in the consents and data protection arrangements that charities have in place when they're contacting their donors or prospective donors. Data sharing and selling, I think, has been brought under control, but there's still a lot of historic data that's been sold out there between charities. And so there may be people there who are receiving contacts from charities for which they never gave a proper and legitimate consent. But we hope that data selling and sharing is now under control. And indeed the code was amended in the autumn to suggest that data selling should not be done at all, and data selling and data sharing should only be done with the appropriate consents. But I think the most critical concern is that I think the majority of larger and medium-sized charities, and possibly even some smaller ones, who deal in fundraising through text, telephone, email or addressed mail, still do not have the consents in place that they need. I'm sure some do, but the anecdotal evidence, and it is only anecdotal evidence when I talk to charities around the piece, is that a lot don't. And indeed, you'll probably know that there are about half a dozen of the larger charities who are completely going through their databases to refresh them and renew them and to ensure that they do have the right consents in place. And this is important, if only for the fact, quite apart from the way in which charities are treating their donors and the likely donor response to them, this is really important because it's a statutory requirement. And I won't go into detail on the data protection legislation and the requirements for consents. And I know that Laura, who's speaking after me, will say a little bit more about that. But you do need, as a charity, if you're carrying out those types of fundraising, and it's not straightforward, the legislation. The direct marketing guidance from the Information Commissioner is pretty difficult to wade through, but it is essential that you have unambiguous donor consent. and that it is refreshed periodically. So there seems to be now quite an appetite out there for some new, clear and straightforward guidance. We're going to try and satisfy that appetite, and we're working with the Information Commissioner to develop guidance for the sector on consents and data protection by the end of the year. And we'll put alongside that some examples of good practice where charities, mostly large, but I have one smaller charity in the bag as well, so to speak, where they're already taking steps to put things right. So look out for that guidance, please, and we hope that the Information Commissioner will endorse the guidance. Also, you may have seen, and if you haven't seen, please look at it, the recent NCVO report of their working group on how to secure donors' consent, and that gives a pretty good guide to what needs to be done. So, more of that from Laura, I very much hope. A key task for us at the moment is to roll out the levy. Over 2,000 charities, based on the volume of their fundraising expenditure declared to the Charity Commission in the 2014 SORP, and all fundraising agencies are being asked to contribute to meet our annual running costs of, as I said before, between 2 and 2.4 million. And I'm pleased to say that we're pretty much now through the process of sending out the letters to charities. Actually finding the details of who to write to was quite a challenge. And the levy payments are already beginning to flow in. So hopefully I may be here in 6 months' time still. So in conclusion, I think since we began to set up the Fundraising Regulator in January, there has, I think, been an increasing recognition in the sector that fundraising practices need to improve, that public confidence in the sector has been damaged, and that an accumulation of high-profile examples of poor fundraising practices affects the whole sector. So we are committed, and I hope you're committed as well, each in your own way, to restoring public confidence by ensuring that donors are always treated ethically and with respect. And we all know that what affects donors also affects beneficiaries at the end of the process. And if the restoration of that public confidence can be achieved, the ultimate beneficiaries of that will be the vulnerable and disadvantaged whom charities exist to serve and where their whole purpose lies. So thank you very much.